building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC 7 News.
Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. Welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. We're asking experts your question every day at 3 o'clock to get answers for you in real time. Today, we'll talk about affirmative action coming back to California after a 24-year ban, depending on your vote this November. But first, alarming COVID news for California and the nation today. New cases continue to rise, even as states continue to reopen. In fact, in 3 of the most populous states, California, Texas, and Florida, they all set records for the number of new cases yesterday. So joining us now to dissect why this is happening and what this means is UCSF infectious diseases specialist, Dr. Peter Chin Hong. Dr. Chin Hong, good to see you again.
Definitely, always a pleasure.
All right, so let's get right to it. The numbers, are the new cases the only set of numbers that concern you, or are there other things that we're watching too?
I think the most concerning thing for me and a lot of people in the hospital system is really the increase in hospitalizations, and particularly the increase in ICU beds. So there's been an uptick of about 20% in ICU bed capacity that's being used. Of course, we're not like Arizona and Florida yet. We still have room to go in hospital capacity, but the trend is very alarming.
Okay, something else that the governor pointed out today as being alarming is the test positivity rate. He says that's rising, 5.6% yesterday. It was 5.1 the day before. How do we interpret that? What does that mean?
So it really gets to the point of a lot of people are wondering, is the number of cases that we're seeing increasing, is it due to just a lot more people being tested? But if the proportion of people who are positive of the number of people being tested continues to increase, it suggests that it's actually a true increase in the community. And that's at the front end. At the back end, like I was saying, if you start filling up hospital beds and you don't have enough ICU beds and trained nurses and respiratory technicians, that's going to be a really big problem.
Is that
so
something?
Both are in the wrong direction.
Right. So is that something you at UCSF are already starting to talk about, what to do if that happens? Because the governor's modeling shows that statewide hospitalizations may triple or more than triple over the next month, he says, if things don't change.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think we're already been activated from the beginning. We kind of got lulled into sort of like a little bit of a quiet time in the last few weeks, but I feel like we have to be activated again. In fact, as you may know, we have a hospital that we opened up as well to take some overflow. And of course, there's a San Quentin situation that's really close to us where, more than 450 people have been diagnosed with COVID in the province.
Okay, something else that I have to bring up because I found this alarming this morning when I heard about it is the CDC is apparently saying that the actual number of COVID-19 cases is likely 10 times higher than reported. How does that work? Why?
It works because people don't have access to testing still in the United States, and because many people with pre-symptomatic disease don't really know that they have COVID. And also, I think speaking to how deaths are categorized in the U.S., not every death, if you die of heart disease, you may die of heart disease with COVID, but unless you're suspecting that, you're not going to call it COVID.
Okay, the CDC also put out this, which was alarming, that they added 3 new coronavirus symptoms to the list. Can you talk about what they are?
Yeah, so I feel like, again, the increase of symptoms of COVID really reflects, what we're understanding as the new symptoms. Myself, I'm not, it seems that, and we've spoken about this before, Kristen, like the number of symptoms really is expanding, which means that I guess if you feel like you might have flu-like symptoms, and before they were more stricter where you had to have respiratory symptoms, but now I think they're more milder. There's more attention again to smell and taste abnormalities and more CNS problems that people may have.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like a mild cold or flu even, right? Congestion or runny nose, nausea, diarrhea,
yeah, so
right?
I mean, the GI symptoms are becoming more appreciated, but I guess, again, to me, it's just what I would say to people is show me a reason why you won't get tested rather than why you would get tested. So in the early days of test scarcity, we were coming up with really strict criteria. I think the trend now is to say,
get
test
tested.
have a very low threshold for testing.
Yeah.
Given these new symptoms.
Right. In fact, Jessica Rudolph just said, how can you tell the difference? And again, that's what we're just talking about. And the tests are pretty readily available now in most of the Bay Area. So that's a good point you make. I want to ask about Texas, because that was one of the first states to reopen. Now they're putting the brakes on further reopening because of the cases, pausing elective surgery, for example. Is that wise? And do you think we should consider doing the same?
I think I was just thinking about that just in the last few minutes, just thinking about our call. And, I think at some threshold, we're going to, toggle back. I think as Governor Newsom said, I'm not sure we're there yet, particularly with people coming to the hospital. I think in general, we were afraid that people were staying away from the healthcare system, so they weren't getting immunizations, they weren't getting their surgeries. I feel there are other things in society we can pull back on, but I worry about sort of like clamping down on the healthcare system.
Well, I do want to ask you, we only have like about 30 seconds, but as you know, we're continuing to reopen with indoor dining and gyms and amusement parks. Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in Vallejo just announced they'll open next week, although I have to say Disneyland did put the brakes on reopening next month. Which of these environments are riskiest to you, like for us to consider what we want to put ourselves in?
Totally. So it's all about controlling your environment. So that dinner party you have with people in your quarantine or your double bubble, totally going to be fine. Meeting somebody, going on a hike, going camping, totally fine. You control your environment. You go to Six Flags, you go to Disneyland, some people are running by, you go to the playground, it's the Wild West. You go on a plane, you don't know what the behavior of the other passengers are going to be like in general, particularly when you put alcohol in the mix. of rock concerts, stadium games, those are all settings where you can't control the environment. But there's one thing you can do, and that's to wear your mask.
I was going to say, do you want to give us the final word? But I feel like what you did just there is probably your final word. Yes?
Yeah, so it's the 3 W's: wearing your mask, washing your hands, and watching your distance. But wearing the mask is the most important thing.
All right, Dr. Chin Hong of UCSF, thank you so much for joining us and giving us that very important information at this time. Take good care.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. We'll take a short break on the air, but the conversation, of course, continues on our live stream platforms, including Facebook Live. I'll see you there right now. I'll be right back.
In commercial break.
All right, our thanks again to Dr. Peter Chin Hong for joining us today in the wake of information really that's pretty alarming, with Governor Newsom saying that hospitalizations in the state will likely triple or more if the model proves correct, if trends don't change and our behavior doesn't change, and there may have to be pullbacks in terms of our reopening. And Texas is, in fact, putting the brakes on that now. And as you heard, Disneyland has put off the reopening date. They had announced sort of a mid-July date, and now that's indefinite. And yeah, part of it is based on the fact that the trends are new cases are increasing at a rate higher than the past few months. And that test positivity rate, so of the people who are getting tested, yes, we're doing more testing, but out of the people who are testing, more are coming back positive. So currently at 5.6%. All right, say hello, if you will. Some of you, I see my regulars are here. Nice to have you here. Next, we have a conversation about affirmative action. As you know, that is where you can consider race, ethnicity, and gender as factors in deciding, for example, in California, who gets into college or who is awarded a government contract. Affirmative action was used, and then it was banned about 24 years ago. And now, due to the State Assembly and Senate passing ACA 5, the Senate passing it just yesterday, now you will get the chance in California to vote on it in November. So that is our conversation coming up. Feel free to post your questions right now. We have one of the legislators behind ACA 5. We have the architect of Prop 209, which banned affirmative action, and we have a UC regent with us. So it's going to be a robust, layered, and hopefully interesting conversation for you.
15.
Water. I drink a lot of water. It's a lot of talking.
We're back in 8.
Are we good? Everyone's here?
6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back to Getting Answers. In November, California voters will be asked to decide whether to bring affirmative action back to California. This after the Senate followed the Assembly's lead and passed ACA 5 yesterday. Basically, voters will be asked to overturn Prop 209, which they passed in 1996, and that prohibited the use of race or gender in university admissions and the awarding of public contracts in California. So it's a complicated debate. Joining us today to flesh out the different layers are San Francisco Assemblyman David Hsu, the architect of Prop 209, Ward Connerly, and UC Region Board Vice Chair Cecilia Estolano. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. I'm going to start with Assemblyman Hsu. You voted for ACA 5. Why?
I voted for ACA 5 because of the structural racism that we have in our society today. You take this moment in history, racial disparities when it comes to our pandemic, racial inequality when it comes to the impact of our recession, protests on the streets because of structural racism in our criminal justice system. We need to address this. And a generation after Proposition 209 said we shouldn't have the ability to address structural racism, we think we should give the new generation a chance to decide if race, as well as gender, ought to matter in how we address public employment, public contracting, and education.
All right, Mr. Connerly, you led the fight to ban affirmative action 24 years ago. Will you lead the fight to bring it back? Why? Can you try unmuting yourself? I don't know if that's the issue, but we're currently not able to hear you, so it could be the mute on your laptop. Do we have Mr. Connerly back? All right. Ward, if you can work on that, because we think there's something on your end with the audio. But in the meantime, I want to bring in Regent Estolano. So if voters were to bring back affirmative action this November, how soon will you be able to consider race and gender again in offering admissions?
We would immediately take it up at the UC Board of Regents. We've been looking at this issue of how to recover the ground that we've lost over a quarter of a century. We already had an important step forward in prohibiting the use of the SAT in admissions, and that was a first step in addressing structural racism in the admissions process. But this has been the largest impediment. There are only 8 states in the United States that actually prohibit the use of the consideration of race, and they prohibit the use of affirmative action. And we went from having some of the most diverse, highest ranked programs in the nation to some of the least diverse. And it's not a small matter of a few students. This is about the leaders of this state and the nation. Having admission to the University of California in its undergraduate and graduate programs creates leaders and significant economic advantages for those who gain admission to our programs and have the benefit of taxpayer-funded schooling. So we've lost a whole generation. I was in that law school class that saw UC Berkeley School of Law go from being the very most diverse top 10 law school to the least diverse top 10 law school. And we've suffered for it greatly. So we'll act on this immediately if the voters speak and tell us that they want to put an end to this tragic experiment in so-called race neutral, but actually racist approach to considerations.
All right. I think we're reconnected with Mr. Connerly. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
And we can hear you, which is great. I want to ask you, do you believe educational disparities still exist in our society with Blacks and Latinos most disadvantaged? Do you believe that disparity still exists?
I think there are disparities in certain sectors of our economy, but I think that we have come a very long way to reduce, if not eliminate, those disparities. The question, it seems to me, is what do we do about those disparities? And I believe that we go the route that we agreed upon back in the 60s, and that is to make sure there is no discrimination and that we give everybody an equal chance on the basis of their own merit, that we not discriminate. I say that again, that we not discriminate. And I think that we should be able to get to a place that is fair as long as we do that.
But it's just not discriminating enough. And this is where Regent Estolano, you're welcome to jump in as well, which is you know, we've often heard the debate and the argument for affirmative action that if you have a foot race, right, and you have one competitor who had been chained up for a long time, and then suddenly you put him at the starting line with everybody else and say, go, run the race, it really is an equal and a fair race. And I'd like to hear from both of you, Mr. Connerly and also Regent Tolano. Do you feel like that is a fair analogy of what is still happening in California today?
Kristen, I think it's the beginning of an analogy, but it's not just if you've been put in chains and then you've been put at the front starting line. No, it's if you're set back at least a quarter of a mile and the starting gun goes off for a half-mile race. That's what we're talking about. The disparity in access to quality education and economic activities is demonstrated, it's structural, it's generational. And for us to pretend that it doesn't exist through this notion of a colorblind admission system is simply a fable. That means that we are complicit in perpetuating this type of structural racism. Look, the University of California, once this policy was enacted, did everything possible, tried all kinds of workarounds to create the best race-blind programs imaginable. And yet we still have not been able to regain the ground that we lost. We still have African Americans and Latinos and Native Americans at a small percentage of what they should be in relationship to their percentage of our graduating high school seniors.
Yeah, just to give folks an idea, UC Berkeley right now, for example, the latest numbers, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but Asian Americans about 29%, about the same for whites, and then Latino students about 13%, African American students about 2%. What is your end goal, though? Like, what would you consider a success? Would it be where the student population is exactly or very close to exactly the proportional representation of our California state demographics at large?
We're not talking about exact things. We're not talking about the exact quotas. We're talking about trying to give folks consideration for the structural inequities that they face by virtue of their race and their ethnicity and what they've been born into. So that 13% that you're talking, or that for Latinos, let's just be clear, Latinos represent 40% of the graduating seniors. African Americans, it's about 6%. So we're nowhere near where we need to be. Now, we're not talking about exact figures, you know, folks are individuals, but we're so far beyond where we need to be that we're clearly dealing with some structural issues, and we need to just name it. And what we've seen on the streets is just trying to tell the truth of what people are facing in our society today.
So
let's talk about the truth.
Mr. Connerly, what do you think is the way to go about it then, if you acknowledge that disparity still exists and equal opportunity doesn't exist yet at, you know, the levels from kindergarten all the way through age 18 when you'll be entering college? What is your solution?
Well, let's go back to the question that you posed, which was, if you have some diversity now, but you're not content with that, what are you trying to get? What is your goal? What do you have in mind? And what I keep hearing from people is candidly, a lot of mindless blather about, we just don't see enough. Well, what's enough? What are you trying to achieve? I mean, how are we going to get there or know that we're there if we don't know where we want to go? So I'm anxious to hear what the goal is and why can't we get there without treating everybody as an equal? Why do we have to discriminate against them, or why do we have to give a preference to someone on the basis of who their granddaddy happened to be?
Well, Assemblyman Chu, I want to bring this back to you, because if we're talking about other ways to level the playing field, what about starting much, much earlier in the game, before we even get to the application for college? We're talking about, you know, preschool education, kindergarten through 12th grade. When you look at the funding and the resources in our different school districts, different parts of California, you know, it's not equal. It's not even. Could the state legislature do something to start evening out the playing field, you know, from early on, from day one?
There's so much that we have already been trying to do to even out the playing field, but to the point of the good regent, if you're starting a quarter mile behind, it's almost impossible to catch up. The fact is, we have so many Californians that have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Let's take education. The reason we need to bring back affirmative action is that when it comes to K through 12, we don't have educators that look like California. 2/3 of all teachers in our K through 12 system are white. And we have 3/4 of our system that are students of color. And we know that if we have more diverse teachers in the classroom, it'll actually help with educational opportunities. We spent a lot of time talking about the impact of this measure on education. Let's talk about the impact in contracting. We know since Ward Connerly authored, along with white conservative Republicans, to pass Prop 209, minority and women-owned businesses have lost over $1 billion a year of contracts because other folks were able to get those contracts. When it comes to employment, I already mentioned the fact that we need more diversity in our classroom. How about diversity when it comes to first responders? I think California would be better served with more African-American police officers, or during the pandemic when our Latino community has been completely struck down. We need more Latino doctors in our healthcare field. These are all things that we want. I think we could all agree that these would be good things, but because of Proposition 209, because of this ban, we can't say that race matters.
So you see affirmative action as one piece of the puzzle in terms of the police reform picture. All right, we're going to take a short break on the air, but let's continue this conversation over on our live stream platforms, and we'll be back with more right after this.
We're in break.
All right, so Regent, if you could kind of tell us how exactly would that work if affirmative action were reinstated in the admissions process? Would someone, for example, get extra points, so to speak, when they're being looked at as an applicant? Or is it really not that different from, I understand you use a holistic review when you look at the whole person anyway? Is this just another layer of that? Exactly how would that work? Explain that to me.
Well, I can't explain it to you exactly because the voters have not yet spoken, and the regions have not adopted any changes in the admissions structure and the admissions process. But certainly it's a factor to weigh. Right now we have 14 factors that we weigh. So it would be one of the factors we could actually honestly look at. So that I can imagine that the regions would consider, but I can't tell you exactly how it works because the regions haven't acted.
Can I ask you why you think looking at socioeconomics cannot help you meet that goal of increasing diversity within the system? Because if you look at people of any racial groups, let's say you have someone who's Asian American but they're poor and had a lot of adversity versus someone who wasn't, or someone who's African American who came from wealth versus someone who came from a lot of adversity. Could you look at the socioeconomics and balance things out that way and consider how strong that person is as a candidate?
It's interesting you mentioned those two examples. When I was a law student and SB1, Regent Connerly's motion at the Board of Regents passed, a group of us formed a study group to figure out how could the University of California work around this, and could we consider socioeconomic conditions, and could that be a proxy for race? And we concluded, as many studies since concluded, that it is not a proxy for race. But I want to also talk about Asian subgroups.
Sorry, you know what? I'm going to put you on hold just because we're coming back on air, Regent Estolano. Thank you. All right, we are back with a conversation today about affirmative action, something that Californians will be voting on in November, now that the Senate and the Assembly have passed ACA 5. So again, joining us is San Francisco Assemblyman David Hsu, as well as the architect of Prop 209, Ward Connerly. He's with us as well, and UC Regent Board Vice Chair Cecilia Estolano. Mr. Connerly, I'm going to start with you because you're quoted as having said, I think that in some quarters, many parts of the country, a white male is really disadvantaged because we have developed this notion of women and minorities being so disadvantaged, and we have to help them, that we have in many cases twisted the thing so that it's no longer a case of equal opportunity, it's a case of putting a fist on the scale. Do you still think that, given all that we have seen in this country in the past month?
This past month has not changed my view at all. I think that this past month we saw a murder committed in Minnesota, and the culprit was a man that we have locked up, but that does not translate into a widespread national systemic racism, in my view. We should deal with that problem, but not to use that as leverage to alter the relationship between people nationwide. In my view, we should be trying to make sure that every person has an equal chance. That's what the Civil Rights Act of '64 commanded. That's what affirmative action in the first iteration that John F. Kennedy signed, that's what it was meant to be.
All right, well, you know what, we only have time for one more comment from each of you, and Mr. Connerly, I just had your comment, but Assemblyman Chu, I want to talk about the fact that some of your constituents, and I don't want to give the impression that it's most or all, but some of your constituents are opposed to ACA 5, believing that it could lead to fewer slots for admissions for Asian Americans, if you will, that because it's a zero-sum game. Do you think that will happen, and what would you say to them?
I wouldn't be supporting this if I was concerned about that. I'm the chair of the Asian Pacific Island Legislative Caucus that recently endorsed this measure. There are over 100 organizations and leaders around the state that have from our community. And the reason we have is we know that this is going to help our Asian community. We know it's going to help when it comes to public contracts. We know it's going to help diversify the ranks of so many fields, including education. And we know that in the field of education, in recent years, we've actually seen Asian American admissions to our University of California system go down during this time period. So the ban actually isn't helping us. And I also want to say that it is a myth that this is going to lead somehow to quotas. The United States Supreme Court said in 1978 that quotas. So that's an important thing for you to know. Proposition 209 pretends that we live in a colorblind society, but we don't. Race matters. Structural racism is real, and it's time for a new generation to have.
Regent Estolano, I'm going to give you the last word, and we do only have 30 seconds, but I want to ask you, given the enormous challenges the UC system is facing, you have all these changes going on. At the same time, you're looking at potentially huge budget cuts throughout the system. You know, the legislature is moving to protect K through 12 funding, but the higher education system, your system, will be looking at big cuts. How are you going to achieve those goals of ensuring a quality education for everyone, given the funding challenges?
Look, the people of California support higher education, always have. And the more that higher education system looks like the people of California, the deeper and stronger support for that system will be. We are committed to excellence. We are committed to making sure that everyone that comes through our doors gets an outstanding education. And the proof is in the pudding. That's why we have consistent support for the University of California, Cal State University, and the community colleges. Californians believe in investing in the future, and higher education is essential for the future workforce.
Thank you so much. All three of you. We'll get to chat for one more minute over on our live stream platforms. Be right back.
In commercial break, 2 minutes.
All right. Thank you all. I just want to say, I know this is always a challenging topic, and there are so many different layers to this, so it is not easy. But Regent Estolano, I want to give you the final word, because I know there are people watching who are wondering about their own children as they are applying. I will thank Assemblyman Chu right here and thank Mr. Connerly right here. I appreciate this. Let's keep this conversation going. But Cecilia, if you can tell me, minus the SATs as well, all right? If you're doing that as well, I know your own faculty, the Senate, has recommended a slower approach in terms of getting rid of standardized testing. Isn't that just one fewer data point for your admissions officers to consider? Like, how will they make up for that loss of that one data point? And I guess my question is, if they were already looking at that data point holistically through the right filters, life circumstances, why is it necessary for it to be gone as opposed to just kind of be an option that they could look at as part of an overall package of a candidate?
You know, it's interesting you asked that question, Kristen, because they all acknowledge, the faculty in fact acknowledge that the SAT is structurally racist. So we were doing a workaround to be able to use that factor in a meaningful way. So this is going to enable us to, if Prop 209 is repealed, it will enable us to really have a truly holistic view of what folks are facing and find those amazing individuals who are overcoming the adversity, the lack of A through G classes in their school systems, the lack of, the number of parents working at the same time, these types of things that create impediments for folks having that extra help they need to get to the University of California. So I have no doubt that we're going to be able to continue to provide a quality education. We'll just be able to do it in an honest assessment of what everyone knows is true in this country, that it does matter, race does matter in this country, and we have to address it head on.
Regent Estolano, thank you so very much. I really appreciated your time and this thoughtful conversation. Hope to talk to you again soon. This is a long process. Take care.
5,
Thank you.
4, 3.
And we are back. Thanks so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. Hopefully you learned a little more about COVID-19 today, this new spike from Dr. Peter Chin Hong and our excellent panel breaking down affirmative action in California. We'll be here every day at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is coming up next. Take care. All right, Facebook friends, thank you for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed that conversation, really thought-provoking. Whoever you agreed with, hopefully you learned something about the other side as well. Take good care.